Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Schmidt, Executive Editor of Farm Equipment Magazine. Welcome to our latest webinar in conjunction with the North American Equipment Dealers Association and Specialty Equipment Insurance Services. Today, our presenters are Edgar Gonzalez, Vice President of Strategic Development, and Brett Davis, Senior Advisor with Specialty Equipment Insurance Services. Before we get into their presentation, just a couple of housekeeping items. On your screen, there's a control panel with a Q&A icon. You can submit questions here at any point during the presentation. And we are going to answer those questions as we go along. So I encourage you to ask them early and often if you have them. And then just a reminder, as always, we are recording today's webinar and it will be shared with everyone who's registered. In the event you want to go back and rewatch it, it will also get posted to the Farm Equipment website if you want to share it with anyone who was unable to attend. With that, we are ready to get started. Thank you again for joining us, and you can take it away, Edgar and Brett.
Okay, want to kick it off, Ed? Well,
absolutely.
Welcome, everybody, and just sort of reaffirming Kim's words, we really want this to be interactive. We have prepared some slides, they're high level, but your questions are really important to us, and we thank you for your participation today as well. So I think we want to kick it off by talking about sort of the current state in our industry of F&I. Our bios are there, so I probably know many of you, and some of you may know Edgar as well, but you can look at them. We won't go over those. Talking about the current state, what's trending. We've been working a lot on best practices as well. And, you know, there's a narrative out there, you know, and this comes from me talking to a lot of different dealers. You know, in the auto world, people talk about profit centers in the F&I. I think in our world, it's really more about a value center than a profit center. Sure, you want to make some money, but maybe that's not the principal driver. It's more about the customer experience. Your customers are repeat customers, or legacy customers, generational customers. We're going to talk about what you want to look for in providers, specifically in the insurance space, you know, extended warranties, physical damage, any kind of rental coverage as well. We'll talk a little bit in detail about coverage considerations. And then I like to always bring up right to repair as well. I've worked quite a bit in my years at C&H on right to repair. I'm very passionate about it. I don't like it. And I know that our friends at NEADA don't like it as well. And but I think we're going to have to live with some form of it. And I think we can wrap this together and talk about some strategies on how we protect our dealerships if the inevitable happens and there is some form of right to repair that comes down through the state legislatures. Okay, so kicking it off with the current state. You know, from our experience, it's all over the place. Typically, what we see is most of the F&I, which mean finance and insurance, is really not centralized. There isn't a central functions. I do know a lot of dealers that do have it centralized, but they still, even if it is centralized, the inputs are heavily driven by the sales community. So that is a lot different than the auto space. And a lot of people think we can just look at the auto industry and sort of translate what they're doing into our industry. And quite frankly, we can't. It is a different business, but there are things we can do to make it much better. There's limited automation. I mean, I'm seeing several platforms, several companies come to light. We'll talk about those. But yet there's really little automation on the very front end to make it really easy, really simple for financing and insurance, quoting, multiple options, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, one of the things that's an outcome of all this is what we call attachment rates. It's really how many pieces of equipment are actually with a warranty or with the physical damage insurance that's offered at the point of sale at the dealership. And to be quite honest with you, it's really low. There are a few OEMs and a few industries that do really well, but as a general statement, especially in ag, it's fairly low compared to what it should be. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, the used versus new consideration. The used to me is a no-brainer. That's where you should have an extended service plan on every piece of equipment. The new's a little bit tougher, you know, because a lot of people don't see until after their base warranty expiration of, you know, they sort of wait and see approach. But that's fine. I mean, but there's a lot of good strategies as well. And to be able if it's a 12-month base warranty to come and visit with the customer again, it's a great touch point. It's a great opportunity to see to see that customer and hopefully get them into the extended service plan if they continue to use and own the equipment or lease the equipment. Customer information security. This is probably the most overlooked thing in our industry. And it's interesting that there's a lot circling around. I remember when I was at the NIADA conference a few weeks ago, SecUvent was presenting there, and they're auditing, they're looking at the security, the infrastructures of our dealers, and giving advice. And so you're seeing a general awareness, but there isn't a lot of great tools yet available, and we might talk about a few, to really protect that information that's coming through these applications for either financing or insurance. A lot of very sensitive data is there. And we've been fortunate as an industry that we haven't seen a lot of breaches. Drawing parallels to the auto industry, there's been many breaches, and they've been significant, and the fines are significant. This does carry over to our industry. So we have the same scrutiny, we have the same obligations. We pay for insurance that we probably can't comply with. So when we go to file a claim, if we did get a breach, we probably wouldn't even get paid. I think that's a typo, Ben. Cross center versus value center. Profit center, it should be profit center or cost center, not cross center. Probably cost center versus value center. In talking to dealers, creating a lot of them look at the F&I department as a cost, and I kind of like to change the narrative to more of a value center, because there's more to it than just making a little commission on this, a little commission on that, adding a couple basis points on your financing. There's just so much more value that's created, and we'll talk about that in some detail as well. But I think we need to sort of set that vision out for all dealers to understand that there's more value to having an F&I department that is fully integrated in your operations today. And we've mentioned before, there's limited technology, limited integrated platforms. One of the things that I've always hated during my career and heard from mostly from dealers, my customers, was that the toggling back and forth from system to system is a nightmare. And it's confusing. It's hard to migrate the data. You have to capture the data in multiple places. You have to load it into multiple portals. Really not an awesome experience for either the end user or for the dealer who's entering the data as well. So moving on, Ben. And what are the current trends that we're seeing? And I like to talk about this, and I've been talking a lot about assets as a service in this world. We're not there yet. Ownership is still paramount in this business. Even leasing is somewhat limited in certain product categories. It's more relevant than others, but we're going to evolve, and we're starting to see more so in construction than ag so far, these full service leases, wrapping everything together. So it's a very definable payment. It's a very defined cost for the customer, and they're using the asset as a service. They're not using it as an asset on their balance sheet. They just want the output of that asset. So I think the mindsets will slowly change there. And I think with newer technologies, packaging that together, how important the whole tech stack is in our equipment today, all these things will move us down the path that ownership isn't quite as important as we thought it was. Now, with the tax structures today, it makes a lot of sense to have ownership, makes a lot of sense to be able to depreciate the asset, in that same year. So, there's a lot of competing interest to see how that'll play out. But I certainly see in the future, and again, it's very difficult to define the timelines, that the asset will be more looked at as a service to your end users. And I see the whole one-stop shop. I think we need to figure out how to make this easy. So when a customer walks in, they can get a very simple quote with everything included. And I believe our customers will start to ask for that. They want protection. They want maintenance. They want, all of these things wrapped into one simple stream of payments or payment annually. Okay. Creating this awareness, as well as centralization. I talk to a lot of dealers that want to do it, but they're struggling, and to get buy-in from their organization. Change management can be quite difficult because the process today is very sales driven. And we find, and this probably goes back to the original comment on the current state, why our participation or penetration rates are so low, is that because the salesperson makes the sale, say it's a combine or a high horsepower tractor. And again, the toggling of the multiple screens, all the other hurdles, the key was getting the combine sold. And then it kind of stops there. Sold and financed, I should say. Very few true F&I departments in our industry today. There are a couple interesting providers out there that are doing some, teaching, training, and outsourcing of F&I departments. I found that fascinating. There's a company called DFS Solutions that many of the dealers are using now that can help set up that F&I department and also help actually do some of the F&I for the dealers. So I think that's an interesting trend, and I think they're gaining traction as well. I'm seeing a lot of outsourcing of warranty services as well, which seems to be working very well. Moving forward, Ben, any questions so far? No questions? Okay. And Edgar, feel free to jump in anytime that you would like. So
thank you, Brett. The only thing I was going to say is we have to keep in mind about service after the sale. And essentially later in the presentation, we will talk to you about everyone's favorite topic, which is absorption. But as we look to discussing the topic at hand, service after sale is very important. And being totally integrated within your dealership, this is a large process because you're driving sales back to you. And I know we're moving quickly, but it's going to be down the road here. So no, Brett, back to you.
Okay, great. So a lot of the questions that I get are, how do I get started? And there is no easy answer to that. But I think a lot of it starts with sort of a self-evaluation and looking at your current process. I had this discussion the other day with a dealer about looking at their process and not necessarily putting holes in it, but just seeing how we can improve it a little bit. And then we look at, is the process flowing correctly? Is the information secure? And in most cases, the answer, unfortunately, is no. And I don't know how many of you are aware of the issues that the industry is facing. There's been legislation enacted, which puts more responsibility on those that are initiating the financing and the insurance to gather that information, but protect that information and store it securely. And it's just not happening. It brings me to a story that I always look back on. When I returned from Latin America on an assignment for CNH, I took over CNH Industrial Capital. A dealer came up to me and said, I think we were at some dealer meeting, came up and said, hey, I got audited. And I said, on what? And he said, well, we have to keep our credit applications. And I have a filing cabinet next to my desk where I keep them, but some of them I don't have because the salesperson had took all the information but forgot to send it back to me, and the salesperson is either since retired, I don't recall, or left for another job or whatever, and that personal information. So they got audited, and how that works. And I said, geez, that's a broken process. And I offered, then I went back, I said, let me think about this for a day, talk with my team. And then I came up with a solution that was, I wouldn't say widely adopted, but semi-adopted, where I said, just make sure you get everything. Don't store it in a filing cabinet. Send it all into us with the contracts. We'll secure it for you. We have the database, that can hold all these e-files. So, don't worry about that. So, and I would say about 50% of the dealers do that, and the other 50% still have that information laying around somewhere. So, it truly is it's something it's going to have to change, and we probably won't get a lot of awareness on that change until there's a notable breach. But we are an easy target as an industry right now, for the most part. We talked a little about the new legislation, Graham Leach Bliley. There are opportunities, which I've met several companies, like presented at the NIADA conference, and there are others that can do audits for you. Very basic audits to determine how secure your information is, your customer information is. And it's, for me, it's so important because if something does happen, the reputation risk of your dealer is at stake. So there are simple things that we can do that we should be doing as an industry to make sure that information is protected. Most of us all buy cars. And again, drawing a little bit of parallel from the auto industry, You won't find a piece of paper in an auto dealer today. There's been tons of breaches. So they've really locked that down. They've used very good platforms, and some of those platforms are now coming to life in our industry, based off auto platforms, but repurposed for the equipment industry. So one of them is Transact. It's a very interesting, secure platform with links and does different things. So I urge you to take a look and have some sort of self-perspective at your dealerships on how exactly you're securing personal information and who is seeing what. In the rest of the world, as we know, you get links. Everything's DocuSign, everything's linked. So, and this is really what we want to do, what needs to be done in our industry for both the financing and the insurance components as well. Okay. Ben, moving on.
And to drive the point home, Brett, regarding something with what you just said about in handling customer information securely, it's not just your customer, it's obviously the dealers, it's all of you. I mean, I say the proverbial we, are all part of the North America supply chain when it comes to agriculture. That information is in fact valuable, and not everyone has the best intent. So it is to your benefit to start thinking about it. You may ask yourself, well, what would anyone do with this information? Nothing good. So essentially, as we develop, the supply chain, and as we try to improve our situation and move forward into 2023 and the years beyond, this is stuff that can be targeted and then used, and those that do have malicious intent. So this is a very real conversation. Brett and myself are getting roped into these conversations more and more, and there are in fact solutions out there to help minimize the risk. So thank you.
Great. So, continuing on the same topic of what can be done with insurance, and especially in the marketplace, it's really important finding the right partners to create that proverbial value center that I like to call it, to be able to build your brand as a dealer. And there's certainly opportunities to do things that can be customized, private labeled, and I think that's a strong consideration depending on your dealer. There's a lot of risk sharing elements that can also be done in the insurance space. And these are things that you can all explore. They don't have to even take the risk as a dealer, but there should be some sort of, everybody should have skin in the game and be able to make some decisions and be able to meet their customers' needs is so important. So the true partnership of who you choose to use as your providers, both on the financing side and especially the insurance side, is really critical. Being able to earn is important to some, more important to some dealers than others. I would say it is something that's important, but there's much more value out there than just marking up an interest rate or marking up a extended warranty contract or getting paid on some physical damage insurance offerings as well. Okay. And then I think moving on, Ben, would be good. So now getting to the heart of the value center, and it's really creating that experience at the point of sale, being able to generate customized quotes. With physical damage insurance and the loss damage waivers, it's in order for you to participate and your dealership to receive fees or commissions, whatever you want to call them, you need to have a licensed agent. So something you should consider. It's not that difficult to be licensed as an insurance agent to be able to participate in the upside of PDI and LDW, if that's interesting to you. It's required. For the most part, physical damage insurance is absolutely required in every single finance contract. So it's something that's needed, and it ideally sold at the point of sale. Again, certain OEMs do a much better job with their captive finance companies of promoting it than others. And there's situations where customers have their own insurance and whatnot, but there's a lot of cases that do not. And that's something you want to make sure that when you have a partner that you can offer that at the point of sale. It's quick, it's easy, it's fast. And ideally, it'd be nice to participate on the upside of that. You can't mark it up. It's not technically legal, but again, commissions can be paid if there's licensed people. Your extended service contract is a whole different story. It's not really insurance. It's a service contract, so it falls outside the realm of the insurance. That can be marked up. You could be paid for that. But and again, we're talking about profit here. But there's some, and again, we often forget that, especially on the used equipment. I always was fascinated that I always thought every piece of used equipment must go out with some sort of extended service plan or extended service contract. Why? Because, geez, even if I didn't mark it up one dime or make one nickel on that product, which you can, the absorption that I would get by stitching that customer back to the dealership and having my provider pay shop rates and retail for parts and travel, et cetera, all those things, it just makes a lot of sense. And I often talk to dealers and they talk about, well, my absorption, I want to go from 75% to 80%. Great. I honestly believe that 5 points could be covered with being able to offer the extended service contract on a more of a holistic solution for your used inventory as opposed to one-off. So it's something you really need to look at, and it needs to be modeled. I know that Edgar and his team have built calculators to help dealers understand that the uplift in absorption on how much that is leaking out on the used equipment if they don't have an extended service contract and they go for some repairs to a third party or whatever. Okay, so definitely something to consider.
All that is 100% true, and that's where we, this is the brunt of our business model. But what's something that has been very interesting is within the past year has been the supply chain, not being able to get equipment, delayed equipment, parts being an issue. And that's not really what I want to talk to you about today. What I'm going to point out is something interesting that, we have developed and worked with you all on both sides of the industry, ag and CE, which is your rental fleet, if you happen to have one. And that should be a profit center, not a money pit. So you yourself need to treat yourselves as the customer. So if ABC dealer has a rental fleet of 100 units, that repair cost should not be hitting your bottom line. You could, in fact, put an extended service contract on the equipment that you, in fact, own, or which is the dealer's, and that does two things. It allows you to mitigate risk on repairs. It allows you to minimize downtime, and you know who's paying for it because you have an established contract. And then should the need arise, which is not necessarily a best business practice, but it's strange times, and you have to sell a unit to a customer that was in the rental fleet, you know it was maintained, and you have the ability to mark it up or sell it for a rate to maybe your best customer, and he knows you've taken care of him. So very adaptive business models is what we're seeing. Yeah. And then in the bottom here, you'll see in top bold absorption, because essentially that all goes back to you. You've married the customer at several levels back to your service center, back to your parts department, which we know are outstanding revenue opportunities as we mark those items up. And especially to Brett, myself, and hopefully all of you all, profit is not a dirty word, right? We all want to have successful businesses with multiple revenue streams. So thank you.
And it goes to the point of why I don't like using profit center. I like using value center, because the absorption probably benefits another department. Obviously, you're saying it benefits the entire dealership and the whole customer experience. So it's really critical. There are a lot of other factors. Finance companies may. I've had discussions with a number of different finance companies that do a lot of refis and things like that. And one of the thoughts in their mind is, geez, if we're going to lend advance on the collateral, I may be willing to increase my advance rates, knowing that there's a maintenance plan, knowing that there's a service contract in place, because then I know my collateral is going to be in better shape. If in the event, if it's leased when it comes back, or even the event of, something else. But, and those are considerations that have not been thought about from the point of view of who's actually financing the equipment, but those things are changing. I know that we had there's potential for residual bumps. I mean, there's potential interest rate opportunities as well for our end user customers. So you're actually laying in value to the customer itself. So it really I think is really wraps into that whole mindset of value creation at the dealership, as opposed to this cost center versus profit center, which, to be quite frankly, in the car dealership, it's strictly a profit center. But we're not car dealers. We're equipment dealers. We're ag dealers. And our customers are multi-generational. They don't go a lot of other places. They might try to do as much work as possible. They may have some third parties that could do a little work on some of the used equipment. Yeah, sure. But the auto industry is totally different. And in that F&I group, this is not about creating massive process, massive markups. This is about creating value for your dealership.
Brett, we did have a question come through.
Sure.
Are those calculators available to dealers?
We can I think Edgar and his team can certainly share some of those things. Is this
Absolutely.
one of them? Yeah. So it's not a very complicated calculator, and we're working on that very recently. So it's really simple inputs. So yes, Edgar would be happy to share that with you on how. And I know some OEMs have calculated that and have shown that in some of their plans and shown it to dealers. And I think it's just so overlooked that we forget about it. But it's a big opportunity. And absorption to me is everything. When I look at a dealer, I see how they're absorbed. I then know how strong that dealer is. Dealers with low absorption, especially when whole goods sales are cyclical, go up and down. What'll drive that business through those cycles is absorption. Okay. I don't know, Edgar, if you want to add anything on this.
I mean, this is a simple model. I mean, this is not holistic. I mean, to Brett's point, I mean, realistically, it's at the topic of hand, right? We were talking about equipment or units sold, and then what we refer to as attachment rate regarding an extended service contract. And you'll see the absorption numbers we came up with below, and then even further below that, what your profit growth would then be. So it's not a holistic view. We have calculators that we would like to share and talk with you about that would benefit the whole dealership. But to keep today's conversation very, in topic, I will say I pulled some simple numbers earlier. And essentially for ag dealers, you absolutely want to shoot for the moon, right? And that number for you is going to be 80 to 85%. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the numbers today don't necessarily reflect that. So I would say that about 60% of the dealers out there are in this range, right? 70 to 80%. So it's quite a breadth. And you can see the drastic differences at every level, right? The jump from 5% to 17%. And in its simplest terms, this will allow you to plan for the future at the dealership level, but then on the sales front, allow you to be competitive, right? A dealer that is, 80 to 100% absorbed has a wider opportunity to maybe come down, not that we want to, but maybe be more competitive on pricing if they're selling something. They may allow them to be a little bit more secure in downturns with the economy. It may allow them to pursue expansion opportunities. So there's really, we could probably do an entire webinar on this. And it's funny because a lot of these topics, unfortunately, are not very glamorous. They're not very exciting, but they should be. I mean, this is your business. This is essentially something that these are tools that we need to adapt and really take and expand on. So, and then the punchline here is this. I mean, if you have an attachment rate that is quite high, especially with the alternative product like extended service contract, your absorption will go up. Full stop.
Edgar, I think the thing that stands, if we go back to the other slide, Ben, the thing that stands out the most is the attachment rates are probably, they're usually not zero, but they're probably more like that 10 to 20% range today in a lot of the industry. Like I said, there's some OEMs that really have done a really good job of promoting it, and I think their dealers have embraced it and understand the value. But just think if you're at 10 to 20% and you double it. And, a lot of people say, well, geez, selling the extended warranty. You start to think then I could even subsidize that and I could still make money.
Exactly.
And we're going to talk a little bit about positioning, and especially when it comes to the used, about positioning a little bit. And I mean, certainly anything that's leased for like a 3 or 4 year term, certainly should go out with some sort of protection plan attached to that. There's just no doubt in my mind on the new side. Absolutely, because nowadays, certainly with the OEMs pushing a lot of the responsibility back to the dealers for the remarketing, at least they've been coming back to that dealer and the equipment's being reasonably taken care of because you're taking care of it. So that's
and I'm glad you said that, Brett, because that absolutely drives the point home, especially with your used, your lease returns, and even the rental equipment. I mean, a lot of dealers absolutely do fall into that 10 to 20% criteria. I would be surprised, shocked even, if we couldn't pick up another 5 to 10 points just by going back and reevaluating current business models, right? So taking everything you just said about lease and even the used fleets and some of the rental and really sitting down to calculate some of this. And I think all of us would be surprised to say, wow, we could easily pick up, 9 percentage points if we were to go and do this for 2023, et cetera.
Yeah. So this is something everybody should be looking at. Again, this parts and service is your highest margin opportunities at any dealership, without a doubt. And so increasing it exponentially, utilizing tools to get you there, will drive additional profitability and additional money to the bottom line. Okay. I think we covered this, Ben.
Yep.
So the right to repair I took on as a separate topic. For me, it's sort of related to the value creation or the value center that we're talking about here. You see the map, and it's coming. I fought it. I know NIADA's fight, AEM, all our different associations that we participate in. I've been very active. We had at CNH George Whitaker, who did a great job of being able to shut it down in different states with his work with different people. So, but I told a few dealers, and they looked at me a little mystified, I guess. I said, well, maybe right to repair is an opportunity. We don't know the form it's going to come. We certainly don't, want right to modify or anything like that. But if it comes, maybe maybe take this negative and make it a positive. It'll force you to sell service contracts, because that'll force them to drive you back to the dealership where the let's call them the gray repair shops can't service a warranty or can't be authorized by the insurance companies or the OEMs or whomever to do that type of stuff. I know some states want that, but I find that that's not going to happen probably. So this is a protection. So you could be actually saying, okay, well, it's right to repair. I got to get everything out with a service plan, with a maintenance plan, make sure that customer is totally stitched to me, period. And then I don't need to worry about him going or her going to an alternative repair shop, a gray repair shop, so to speak, because I can manage this using these products. And geez, by the way, I'm going to make money doing it, and I'm going to drive additional absorption. So maybe it's not the end all be all. Certainly we don't want any intrusive legislation, but maybe it's something not to fear as much as we do, but to find tools to manage around it and to actually improve some of our processes because of the legislation. No different than Graham-Leach-Biley in customer information security that's being applied to us as well. We're going to have to improve our processes. So if this does come to fruition, and we start to see it take hold, we have to do some soul searching and figure out how to improve our processes so we drive those customers back to our dealerships. Okay. Edgar, anything to add?
Well, I mean, Brett, you know how I feel about this. I mean, we represent and work with a virtuous product. I mean, this is going to do everything it can to help the dealer, the ESC portion, not obviously right to repair, and your end user. And Brett, what you said is 100% true, right? The business model needs to be you stitch the customer, and I know some of the ag dealers have these generational favorite original customers that will never go anywhere else, and we all love each other, and that's fantastic. But in the business world, the dollar is king, and if something maybe doesn't have a plan, and we can fix it ourselves, or maybe it's something I can take down the street. I mean, this is still a business of people. These things will happen. So in an effort to be simplistic today, instead of fearing this, let's get in front of it. And so if every piece of equipment has something that is attached to you, once again, it goes back to those core points we spoke earlier. Your value center, right? So in an ESC contract will in fact promote them buying parts from you directly. It will in fact allow them to bring in their equipment for warrantable repairs. And then, as we all know, not every repair is going to be something that it came in for, right? So if a transmission is the repair, but we found 10 other things that are wrong with the equipment, our customers trust us. They're going to not want to be down 2 weeks from now because they were just there in to see you. Fix it all, they'll say, or hopefully we think they'll say that. And then essentially, once again, driving revenue through your service center and your parts department. This is something where it is a little murky, but as Brett stated, it's not something we want to be in fear of or in dreading that it'll happen. It probably will happen, but we need to get in front of it. We need to be strong and united and have an ability to combat it in our own way and be successful business people at the same time.
Yep. Well said. Okay, Ben, moving on. So, yeah, I'll make sure, Edgar, you chime in on this one because this is important. But, what I would look for in a service provider, especially on the insurance side, you want breadth of product coverage. I mean, again, this whole notion of toggling between systems for a PDI product versus a extended service plan or the loss damage waivers for rental or RDW or LDW. Everybody uses different acronyms, but it's very difficult for a dealer to manage multiple service providers. So they want to have solutions, and complete solutions. So there's many companies that offer only components of what you need. Try to find a company that can offer the full breadth of the products. Okay. The other thing is the ability to quote it and have it integrated. Some dealers are starting to build CRM systems or buy CRM systems. How can we get it integrated there? How can the quoting be integrated? So is the quoting very easy? And I saw with the Minta, actually for the first time yesterday, their new system that they launched. And I was like, geez, this is so simple. It's beautiful. And the dealer that was looking at it with us was like, wow, it is. I mean, it's a nice, easy, simple. So that's what you want. Some easy, simple, and that way your salespeople who tend to be driving this process, and I don't think that's going to change overnight, will feel comfortable being able to quote it, and it's very easy, and it's not the continuous toggling between all the different systems. You want to look for someone that can provide some customization because we're not all alike. This is we're not this is not a homogeneous world. So different parts of the country, different parts of the continent, Canada's different than the US. What do you need in your locations at your dealership that's most important to you? So making sure that you can get without over engineering anything. Keep it simple. I tell everybody that, keep it simple. But what, because my situation is slightly different, are we willing to deviate from a standard and perhaps pivot and provide some customization? And that can come in a lot of different forms. I mean, I like the opportunity of this whole notion of risk sharing, which can come in some different forms, having the dealer in some ability to make decisions that typically would fall within the insurance company. I would like to see the dealers have more input into those decisions and have money to spend that's set aside for them to be able to make those decisions. I think that's really important. And that way they have skin in everybody has skin in the game. There's opportunity because, again, our customers are legacy customers. For me, in the auto world, it's very black and white. You come in, it's out of warranty, sorry, you pay. In our world, okay, this particular person has been a customer at this dealership for 2 generations, this family. And maybe something just fell outside of something, it's a gray area. Well, let's make it easy for our dealers to customize a program where they can actually just take care of it then. And that's their decision at the point of sale at the dealership. White label opportunities. And I talked about this at the beginning, building your brand. Do you want a service plan to reflect your dealership and your dealership's value? Do you want it customized to the point where it's utilizing your name? even though it's being administered by somebody else that has the professional tools to administer it. And then it goes to that risk sharing element. To me, becomes very important if you are going to put your name on it. So that way you have opportunity to make sure that your customers are serviced in the way that they need to be serviced. Ooh. Parts and service reimbursements. Obviously the simplest thing is you want to make sure they're retail, and you want to make services posted shop rates, period. Timely reimbursements are very important as well. Okay. Being able, and then again, we mentioned early on, being able to, the holistic coverage of the rental fleets. There are things also that you might look at to consider, like a sort of a base or standard plan for every piece of used equipment if you're creating some sort of value center and creating some sort of additional brand recognition. So there's some considerations to think about. So when you talk to your provider, those are things that, if they're important to you and you want to grow this business and you want to grow your brand, you need to ask these questions and make sure that they're out there. Okay, Edgar.
Yep. No problem. So listen, here's what I would say. About once a week, I get somebody that raises their hand and says, okay, I've heard everything you've said. How is this different than when I go buy a vehicle? And sometimes I like to take it down a notch and state the obvious, which is, unless I'm using it to drive for Uber, my vehicle is a depreciating asset. It's not something I'm using to make money, right? And the contracting world, maybe buy a fleet of trucks, that's a little bit different. For us, our clientele, they work dirt, they move dirt. As far as ag goes, I mean, we're the nation's infrastructure. I mean, if you need fuel or food, that's what our client base does. So you'd have to differentiate yourself. I mean, this is a very serious business. When we're looking at 6 to 7 figure pieces of equipment, you're not just going to call up State Farm. You need a partner that understands what you do and that's going to work with you. So I like to use the word bespoke, which is basically find a service provider that's going to cater to what it is that you're actually doing and understands your application. And to take it a step further, Brett hit it right on the head. Somebody that's going to actually partner with you and in fact make you, for lack of a better term, whole, right? So essentially you are also the customer, right? So no one likes to get short paid on claims. Essentially where we live in the world, things happen and they get sent in for reimbursement. There needs to be a baseline. And I think there's a minimum for that, which is what Brett was alluding to. And then my favorite topic, if you couldn't tell, which is, make your rental fleets and your loaner fleets and your used fleets a part of your business opportunity, right? So as you move forward, and supply chain issues aside, I mean, I think we're headed for a soft landing here. I think we're going to have a great 2023 industry wide, but you have to account for what you're not doing today. So essentially adding value where it exists, but maybe it's opportunities we haven't touched on before. And I will say, again, there's a lot of lost potential on the revenue, on the rental applications, as well as on most of your use. The used equipment should go out with a plan, bar none. I mean, that is a baseline best practice I'd like to impart on you. It makes it easier for the salespeople to get what it is that they're looking for. It makes things easier on the end user should there be a failure. So, yep, that's where I'm at.
Totally agree. And, staying on the topic, I mean, the one thing that we didn't put on here was, obviously, when you look at a service provider, I think that it's important for you to ask as a dealer, what's in it for me? Obviously, we talked about, those are the things that, we want to educate on, but, how are they going to compensate you for selling their products as well is very important. And
it is a two-way street.
You should participate. The more you participate, the more customization you can have, the more risk sharing you can have. I mean, it makes sense. You should not be just passing it through. You should be earning as well. And as to whether you look at it as a profit center or cost center, that's individual considerations. Again, I like the concept of value creation as opposed to profit creation. But they go hand in hand. So that's certainly a very significant piece of this puzzle as well, making sure your providers, you can share in the upside. Okay, Ben? I think we covered this already pretty much. So our contact information, we'd like to get some questions if it's possible. We only have that one. Are there any questions before we conclude? And
I have a question for you guys while we wait for some of the
Mhm.
dealer. Well, here, one came through, so I'll hold off on my question. At what point do you make the handoff? Do you from the sales to the F&I manager?
That's a good question. So it's all over the place, and I'm not here to tell people how to manage their business, because this is a very unique business, and the relationships of those salespeople with the end users are very critical. So, and certainly you don't want to impair that in any way. But I think the comfortable answer is, at some point, having that centralized department and getting some of that personal information away from the salesperson is probably not a bad idea. And salespeople will turn over. I know we have a lot of legacy people; they will retire. But I think as we move forward, let's put it, for example, I know in my days at CNH, I forget what the number, we used to, over a certain credit, ask for credit, we had to require financial statements. And a lot of times that would fall on the dealer to be able to provide them. Sometimes the dealer would say, you just contact a customer, blah, 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 different form. But they would send it by email, or they print it and then scan it and get it to somewhere that needed to be evaluated, which none of us do that personally really much anymore. We all use links. So I think that this evolution, we don't want to take the power away from the salespeople. We want to make it easier for them. And this centralized group has to be able to do that. And then I think on the new equipment, especially the ones that don't have a warranty attached, this F&I department really has to find the tools, using whatever processes they have or whatever reports they get, to look at the end of the base warranty and say, well, you don't want to be uncovered for the next 3 years if you plan to keep the equipment. Oh, and by the way, if you don't want to keep it, we'll take it as a trade, right? So it's a great touch point, but the F&I department could really help drive that, certainly. I think it's going to be a very gradual thing, Kim. It's just such a unique business. It's such a face-to-face business that I think it's going to take a little bit of time before the salespeople are truly just selling the attributes of the equipment, and everything else is handled in the back office. It's getting there, but it's certainly going to be an evolution. And the better the platforms and tools that we have at our fingertips, I think will help us drive that behavior and make it a lot easier. It's just not easy today. That's the biggest problem we have. The tools aren't available. Now I'm seeing tools like Transact and a few other companies out there doing some things that are making it a lot easier. So I think that's our future.
They did provide a follow-up and said, would sales arrange the equipment and attachments and then make the handoff similar to how it's done in automotive?
I don't ever foresee you dragging a customer into an F&I office with a guy sitting in front of him and offering tire warranties and all kinds of crazy stuff. That's just not our business. That's not who we are as a business. That's not the kind of business practices we want to have. So
I would say what we see today is two versions of this story. I would say not every dealer has, and I could be mistaken, but I'm giving you my 17 years picture experience, but not every dealer has an F&I manager. There's financial lead folks, there's CFOs that really like this product, but sometimes that person simply isn't available. So you have a sales force that is then driving this change and driving this action for two reasons. Once again, it's a profit stream. And secondary, they're very protective, or most salespeople are, of their clients, right? They want the best for them. But there is a third, more sinister opportunity, which is, hey, skinny margins. If it's something that maybe I'm not going to get the deal on, maybe I don't sell the ESC. And that is where we wish there was, in fact, a handoff. In fact, the F&I manager, that's all their bread and butter, right? And essentially, that's where we want these discussions to occur. So to bring the conversation home, I would say right now, it's being done two ways, and it really depends on your dealership. You really need to take a look inwards and determine, how do we want this to go? Do we want to empower our salespeople and give them a certain length of rope to Brett's point, because we don't think that these deals that are being made out in the field on hoods of trucks and in barns into the office, if that is a good business model for you, then yes, you should have a clean handoff. But otherwise, I would say we probably need to look at empowering our salespeople, but also having the F&I manager involved for authorizing, whatever it is that we need to sign off on.
Yeah, and I was just looking at Kim. There's another question that's, I think, an absolute. If you want to read it out to the team, it's excellent.
Sure, I was just about to go there as well. So the next question is, how do you establish an F&I manager in a small store? My sales team is tight knit, but between all the product attachment knowledge they need to know, they have incredible challenges selling anything additional. They're unsure if they have the volume to support an F&I role.
We'd have to look at the volume. I think it's probably very easily justifiable. And it's having, ideally you would like the opportunity with the F&I manager, and maybe they do something else too if it's that small of a store. Maybe they have them, they're multitasked, but having the F&I with some sort of tools that they have visibility to everything that the salespeople are doing, that they can support them, to me is nirvana. That's the ideal situation. So you need to start looking at those types of tools that are relatively simple, that provide overall administrative rights to this person that could be an F&I manager. And then the folks in the field are the sort of the inputters, if that's the way the business model is working. But then each day, each minute, there could be alerts sent to the F&I manager, and it could be very helpful when they're at the point of sale, which is most likely remote, that they do provide different quotes on the other ancillary products that are very important to the dealership. So that's something that I think that can happen very easily. And I think it could be very justifiable. And again, I don't know the scale of this dealership. I don't think it's a size matters, that you have to be big to have an F&I department. I think you just need to have what you want. I want to make sure I stitch my customers to me. I want to sell more insurance. I perhaps want to make money on the F part of it, on the finance side, but that's a little bit more difficult in our industry. Although in a rising rate environment, there's a little bit more opportunity. So
in that small store, small organization scenario, does it have to be a new person, or could that F&I manager be, the controller or someone like that who's got another finance related job?
It could be, sure. I mean, as long as they have the bandwidth to do it, they can have.
We've seen that.
Yeah, I could see it. Depending on the size of the store, and I talked about. I've seen several companies getting training as well. So if the person, maybe doesn't have the adequate training, there are some companies that out there do some nice training, have some nice training tools like DFS and a few others, but they could outsource it. So I just don't think it's simple enough to say because we're small that we can't do it. I think we need to sit down and evaluate how much more revenue can I create, how much more value can I create, whether my dealership's big or small doesn't really matter to me.
It is a value add role, but I mean, to Brett's point, it could be, first of all, I will say this, it's best if it's a stakeholder or somebody involved with the financials. They will have a better, if not more pristine look as to what is actually occurring on the back end of the business, right? They're going to have cross objectives because salespeople go sell everything that isn't nailed down, right? And that is absolutely how we're going to make some money, but not all. And so the F&I manager does need to have a good grasp of what things really look like inwards. So to your point, a controller, CFO, somebody that has the bandwidth and the ability to do this, I think that's fine. I just think that, it does deserve a degree of time. So that is difficult. It's definitely wearing many hats, but we have seen that.
Yeah, and I'll go back, Edgar, sort of wrapping it all together. And when you look at your service providers, are they willing to help you with that type of training? Are they willing?
Exactly.
Are they willing to share these calculators with you and show you the benefits and talk to your team? It could be just as simple as that. And that's certainly not going to be a cost at all. that's just going to be something that will drive more business to the service provider, of course, and more opportunity for the dealership. So your service provider should be willing to do that for you. At least I've always felt that way. That's the true nature of partnership with this type of service provider.
I agree. And that's that two-way street that we spoke about, Brett, which is, having the ability to go in and empower not your customer, but your dealer partner, and have that two-way bespoke program. If you're a small dealer, you shouldn't be limited or prohibited from doing something that you have objectives on just because you're not as big as dealer A, B, C, D. You should be able to do it. You need to do it. And there are providers out there that are willing to bring you in, train you, help you, and want you to be successful.
Yep.
All right. The question I was going to ask relates to can you expand, Edgar, or not Edgar, Brett, on the idea you had about the opportunity in service plans as it relates to right to repair, what you were thinking there?
Yeah, no, this is something I've been thinking about for a couple of years. So, we're concerned that manufacturers will have to open up sort of their secrets, so to speak, and provide tools to the gray shop. I call them the gray shops, whether that's an accurate call or not. But at the end of the day, and I said, well, I think to myself, if I have every piece of equipment that goes off my lot with an extended warranty, pretty much, I know that they have to come back to me. Period. So I'm not overly concerned about giving those tools to the gray shop, because I'm going to put the warranty on there and drive them back to my location. And it's going to force me to sell more of these service plans, maintenance plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I see it. It's sort of playing defense to gain offense, because again, you're creating that value for your customer and for the overall dealership, and you're protecting that critical piece of your business, that you don't have some leakage of customers to these gray shops if the right to repair becomes, law across the land, which some form will happen, but to the extent of which we don't know yet. Does that make sense to Kim?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We probably have time for one more question, if anyone had anything for either Brett or Edgar.
Okay.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we will get things wrapped up. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and to Brett and Edgar for sharing their time with us and providing some great information. Like I said earlier, today's presentation and audio will be available on the Farm Equipment website in the event anyone wants to go back and review it, or have someone else at the dealership watch it as well. On behalf of Edgar, Brett, as well as the Specialty Equipment Insurance and the ADA teams, and the Farm Equipment staff, thanks for joining us for today's webinar. There'll be a short survey that pops up once you leave. Please let us know what you thought, and you can always reach out to me directly with any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.